Joe Francica, Managing Director of LocationIntelligence.us. Great privilege to have you on Geospatial FM.
Oh, thanks for having me, Will. Glad to be here.
Okay, so as everyone knows, through my efforts maintaining the Geospatial Index, I try to inhale every single geospatial market report that comes along. So finally, I came across yours, Joe. So thanks very much for preparing that. Could you tell us a bit about the guide to the location intelligence marketplace, why you wrote it, who could benefit, and the reasoning behind the segmentation of the industry?
Yeah, I wrote it because I saw that there was really a lack of understanding in the marketplace of how we are to segment the various components, the companies, the people that play in this industry, and what the relationship is to each other, how these companies may partner with each other, and what the status is today of what perhaps is the more important industries to watch, the companies that are up and coming. I wrote it because it's really a compilation of work that I did in my past profession in enabling sales account managers and marketing people who were very unfamiliar with the market. And as you know, geospatial is not an easy market to comprehend, let alone spell. People don't really understand what we do for a living, and all we are is we always say, well, hey, do you know Google Maps? And people then get a rough idea of what that is. So it was primarily an effort on my part to fill a gap that I thought was there that could be used again by both sales account leaders as well as students who may want to get into this profession but don't quite know where to start.
Okay, so is it just US companies?
No, it is a global list of companies, and again, from touching the various aspects of all of the different, what I have as the 13 sub-markets of location intelligence. So it's global in nature. I came up with a list of about 150 representative companies. It is by no means exhaustive because my list is that I keep as a compendium probably exceeds 1,000 companies at this point that are participating in the market in some way. This could be composed of pure players, many of which we know, as well as partners of those players, resellers that you know that are either reselling the products of those key players or they're somehow providing services and solutions around that. And that is how I divided the marketplace. So if you take a look at the report, I've divided it into the big subcategories or the big markets of data and software, and then the submarkets that play around like that. For example, the SaaS players, software as a solution, the satellite and aerial imaging providers, etc. So 13 markets. Now, one thing I made clear in the report is that I believe data is perhaps the most important segment of the major buckets. I think software is taking a backseat to all of the data, and you can imagine why. It's the rise of artificial intelligence, which lives and breathes on data. So, I've broken up the submarkets into all of the different components of what those data submarkets might be and how they play a role.
Okay, fascinating. So, I mean, I don't want to have you start reading the report for us, but maybe we can drill down a bit, if that's okay, on this data submarket segmentation. Have you got any examples of new products that have been brought to market to do with data or interesting, unique players in this space
Well, I
or any
think
other trends?
one interesting part of the market, where you see a lot, as you do in your work, a lot of the public money, the companies that are public right now are in the satellite remote sensing space. Like that is where I started my career, 40 plus years ago. And now what we're seeing is a real interest in that data. The problem is there's too many pixels. There's a launch of all of these low Earth orbit remotely sensed data satellites. They're collecting hourly repeat visits of the same place over the year. So what are we going to do with all that data? Well, there has to be some derivative productization from all of the information that's being collected. And the one company that is also public that I think is doing a very good job is Planet Labs. Will Marshall is doing excellent in representing his company as something that is a data company, not just a satellite company. Some people, some companies think that they just launch satellites and don't really put emphasis on the data side. Well, in this era of AI, what is going to be ingested in both large language models and now large geospatial models is all of this location-based data, and it starts with a place on the Earth. But that's just one example. I mean, the remotely sensed data market is nice, but as I said, there has to be some derivation of and productization of the reflected solar radiance values that you get from collecting the data from satellites. So what is that? Well, you see a lot going on with like just basic building footprints, and using models to extract the heights of buildings, the rooftops of buildings, and then you see many players collecting that all over the world, including some of the big IT companies that have put their big foot in our market, like Microsoft and Google and others. So the derivation of building footprints is one, and then of course, you can't ignore the fact that these little devices we carry around in our pockets all the time are broadcasting location. And so all of the mobile data that's being collected is now leading to other things like origin destination models, brand affinity. If you're passing by a Starbucks or wherever, you can calculate exactly what your brand affinity might be. And then that's not to ignore vehicular traffic. So again, the mobile data is very keen. And as we see going on in places like Germany, the price of gasoline can be set by the hour because they know average daily traffic and they know, really how to set prices. So it's a very interesting situation we're going on the data side. So I think it's a very good representative example of how data is just being ingested, processed, and as I usually try to tell people, it answers the where questions. Like, where is all of this traffic going and why is it going? So you begin to ask all of these questions that are as a result of collecting all this data.
Yep. I love your helping us to see what people think of geospatial from the outside looking in. So it seems like what you're talking about is the perspective that venture capitalists might have, private equity. What they see is the signals coming out of the capability of our industry in terms of the capability of the technology. So you talked about constellations in space, how to detect change on the surface. But you also talked about the theme of mobility data, both in terms of pedestrian mobility and car mobility. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah. Yeah, and to go back to your point, so let's take up the issue of what are venture capitalists looking for. Well, they all want money in some way, and so what's going to happen is they're looking for the companies that present a value proposition based on the data that they have. Now, what I have seen happening in all of those spaces, in particular, so let's take footfall data. There are some very good companies that are doing things like evaluating brand awareness, brand affinity, and there that leads to some other answering of the where question, which is, well, okay, where are they all? Where are the people going to come from? How do you staff a store? What's the traffic in my store? And that, of course, it leads to the ultimate answer of how much money am I going to make per square foot in a retail establishment? So it doesn't really matter what your retail store is. You're always looking for, what can I generate on a per square foot basis? If I rent X amount of space, how much money am I going to get from that space? So if you're a VC or a private equity company, you always want to know, how much money am I going to make if I invest in this data company that's going to help other XYZ retail company? So that's why I get back to the point of productization, where don't just throw data at me, don't throw pixels at me, give me an answer to a problem. And of course, that is what the where the money should flow is. If you can answer me a question and then solve a problem that I've never been able to solve before with this location-based data stuff, then okay, now you've got my attention.
Okay, so another couple of points that I thought were worth drawing out of what you said. I love the term large geospatial model. I'd love to see us in geospatial talking about that more often. You talked about Planet as not just being a company that delivers pixels and intensity values in those pixels, but there is a level of derived products from that. I don't want to make it sound pessimistic, but is there some value in briefly touching on where money is currently being wasted? For example, companies that are not doing what Planet is doing.
Well, first of all, it's not talking about your company as a data company where, hey, look, I've got this great technology. I've got this, I'm revisiting the planet every hour and I'm collecting, X petabytes of data. That's just the wrong way to talk about what you're doing. And I think that you could carry that over to the companies that are doing building footprints or just selling parcel data. Tell me what problem you're solving. If you're just a provider of parcels, are you really solving for the property tech part of the industry? Are you doing a lot with mortgage underwriting so that, yeah, now I can understand what the value of that property is? And oh, by the way, what's the risk on that property? What's the growth potential of that property? So if you can begin to answer those questions and not just providing the raw data like pixels and parcels, that's where I think you eventually have to end up. And I see that that there are companies that are doing that today.
Okay. And another part of why I'm running this podcast is actually looking for tips about how to be a successful entrepreneur in geospatial. So the message I'm receiving from you is, yes, of course, understand the dynamics, the technology of geospatial, but perhaps focus just as much on the questions of the customer groups that you're trying to serve and have pay you. The message is to go out into the marketplace and understand the dynamics of other businesses just as well as your own. Okay, I feel like there's a whole podcast really in this data question, but there are some other questions to get through with you. So maybe we'll go through those, but just put a bookmark in the point that there seems to be a lot of interest from outside of geospatial in us as a source of data and necessarily location, mobility, geographic data. So Joe, the next question revolves around your observation that there are actually many charlatans in the business of geospatial today. So this is where market research in geospatial from a seasoned and critical eye like yourself perhaps can be valuable. So could you talk around that?
Yeah, I must get a new market research report sent to me every other day by some market research company touting that they've got all the numbers on the size of this market or even a segment of that market. And if I were anybody looking, I would run screaming away from these people because they look at a very narrow segment. And I've never seen yet one that has the rigor that I would call that would benefit the price that they're charging for all of these. It's one reason why I put out the guide to Location Intelligence Marketplace and made it free and available under a Creative Commons license because again, I thought there was a lack of knowledge out there and I wanted to at least get a foundation for people to take. If they want to go buy one of these reports, I would just offer a lot of caution. They often take, as I said, a very narrow segment of this market and therefore cannot, by virtue of the fact that they're only going to list, 10 or 15 companies, understand the full breadth and impact that location-based information has on anybody's broad economy, the world's, gross domestic product. So I would urge caution. A few years ago, I will mention a report by a company called Acel Tasman down in Australia, where they tried to estimate the gross domestic product impact of geospatial technology. It was a wonderful report. I cite it often because we don't realize, we in the profession, of what we do for a living is really valuable from an economic perspective. And that's another thing I would bring into the venture capital market is, read these reports and look at how many areas of domestic production and manufacturing and oil exploration that we really touch with the technology that we have. Just to go back to the market research for a second, I know of only one company that's doing even a decent job, and that would be IDC. But there again, they too can only focus on a very narrow part of the market. So it's difficult when somebody says, "Oh, we have a $15.3 billion market size for geospatial." I would just say, stop, think about what it is you're reading, and give a true just stop and think about whether that's a true evaluation of the market. So I think there are a lot of charlatans out there. I'd be very cautious. During my career, I've seen too many of them, and many of them go bankrupt because they're not doing a very good job.
Yeah. So, I mean, immediately your comments about the GDP impact of geospatial reminded me of a former guest, Dana Goward from the Resilient Navigation, Positioning, Navigation and Timing Foundation. So just from the perspective of one technology, GNSS, GPS, whatever positioning constellation you want to talk about, there is a huge, or a better way to look at it is the impact on GDP and just overall functioning of society if the various GNSS constellations suddenly were all shut down. All of the financial system will stop working apparently, because it's all dependent on the very precise timing that's available from these constellations. So, I think it's also a source of pride for all of us in this industry to understand really how vital we are for the nervous system of our modern economy.
It's true. It's a national security issue for every nation that we have precise location, PNT, right, and GNSS. Just think of your own daily life, right? You almost can't get around anymore without navigation. Certainly, you couldn't have trucks on the highway. But you're right about the financial markets. They would come crashing down if we did not have correct positioning. Or take the insurance business. It's funny. I always say that the insurance business is an inherently location-based business, right? You can't underwrite a policy without understanding the risks, the natural disasters, crime. Where you are is all based on knowing the location and what risks and perils that you are exposed to. So, I break up what I would call the two big buckets of industry. So we have what I would say the naturally geographic industries, right? Transportation, real estate, telecommunications, and then I would have what I call
There's
the
agriculture
geographic.
too, farming.
Yeah, farming. Yeah, sure. But then I have the geographically challenged businesses, right? Those are ones that don't understand geography and geospatial very well, but rely on it every day regardless, right? The retails, the banks, insurance companies. There is an inherent need for location information in those industries because let's face it, you can't plop down a McDonald's or a Starbucks or a Costco without knowing, as I said before, what are you going to make? How much money are you going to make if I put it in that location, at this place, at this intersection, and why am I doing it? So I think the days for real estate in particular of gut feel, like, oh, I think it's great here. I think those days are long gone, and we're developing some much more sophisticated tools to be able to get at fine locations. In fact, what I am doing now is using the individual chatbots to put in a model, a site selection model, to see if it will spit out some likely locations. So I published an article recently called "AI Almost Found My Vacation Property," and the criteria I put
But
in
it
there
chose a
was
dump instead.
right, right. Well, so the criteria was very straightforward. Like, find me the possible counties that did not experience high appreciation during the pandemic, because I wanted to find a relatively cheap property. So it didn't experience high appreciation, is close to other vacation properties or other rental. There's high rate of rental rates during the summertime. So you get all of these criteria. So location, close to a nice vacation area, low appreciation, relatively low density of population. And so I used 5 chatbots to predict this, and I had some very good help from Applied Geographic Solutions to backstop me with other data, some demographic data. And it did a not so great job. But I think AI will reach a point where I will question whether I need a geographic information system software to do my analysis. I will
Absolutely.
think eventually it's getting to that point.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like we're skipping ahead in the agenda a bit.
Oh,
But it sounds
sorry.
like the market's converging on, as you said, large geographic models underpinning a new generation of software, which, yes, will finally release us from the purgatory, which is ArcGIS and QGIS.
Yes, you're
Thanks.
right.
Thanks for giving us hope, Joe. Okay, just another thing that cropped up in my mind with reference to another prior guest. We had Nadine Alamay on a few episodes ago, who, when she was at Taylor Geospatial Institute, I just wanted to flag the field boundaries data product, to accompany your points about the hugely extensive now 2 billion plus building footprints from Overture Maps Foundation, but also, basically condensing work from Microsoft, Google, OpenStreetMap. There's also a layer cake that is mainly, or it's open data, so from OpenStreetMap as another source of at least the building footprints. But yeah, I wanted to flag the field boundaries as well as another important foundational geospatial data set beyond this global building footprints one. Okay, so another theme that you wanted to talk around is the death of SaaS, or software as a service, and the rise of AI. So actually, this was the next question. So why can we do most things today without GIS software, and the companies that are most at risk because of this shift?
Yeah, so let's go back to the discussion about data. So long as the data is available, you can do quite a bit. There are, and what I'm referring to is I can use an AI chatbot that can retrieve information, assemble the data, understand the query that you are stating, and deliver an answer. However, the constraint is that data available in the public domain, right? The proprietary data providers they have valuable information, right? And so they're not going to let that out there themselves, right? They may eventually come up with their own AI model that taps into their proprietary information. But it still begs the question of whether AI will get you 80% there. And that will help from a productivity standpoint. That if I know, for example, if I'm locating another retail franchise, and I can get at least into, narrowing down my choices to 5 or 10, then when I go to my real estate VP, we can eliminate some things relatively quickly in the decision-making process and focus on others. And I do think that the data, while today relatively basic, I think will improve over time. And then the reasoning models, where you get inference models, that I think will, be able to get us even closer. So I'm cautiously optimistic about the potential of AI. I think that the desktop mapping companies that are out there face a potential risk, and that could be, our the ones we know and love. And so it's going to be on those
I'm
companies
sorry,
to
love,
evolve.
Joe.
Well,
There is no love.
let's be cordial in our discussion and give them the grace that they deserve for being companies of growing concern, right? So
Sure.
there's I don't get any advertising like I used to do for those companies. So I in my former business of being an editor and publisher, it was required of me to be a little bit
Right.
guarded in my messages. So But let's just say that those companies will be at risk unless they evolve,
Yeah.
right? And there has to be an evolution. And it's not just an evolution of the product, it's an evolution of their business model. So whether I was selling software as a service, what do I do now where I can just go into a chatbot and go, tell me this, and it spits out an answer? Anybody who's used any of these chatbots to put in a relatively sophisticated query knows how quickly the information can be assembled. It truly is astonishing. And I have to tell you, being an old guy, that I haven't been as excited since 1994 when I first sat down and looked at Netscape
Yep.
as that first internet browser, because your jaw drops and you go, I had no idea you could do this. And that's what I think a lot of people are finding out now.
Yeah, yeah. And I like that the idea that, really it's sort of once every 30 years that something truly revolutionary comes along. And I like that, yeah, you're comparing it with the emergence of the internet. It somehow feels right, it takes, it's sensible that it would take 3 decades or so to inhale all of the text that humans have ever generated, and yeah, put some compute behind that, and then yeah, there's a layer of intelligence that can emerge. I also like that you use the term reasoning and introduce the idea that we might want to think about how effective reasoning done by machines currently is. There's a reference there to another former guest, Nelson Roque, who's a cognition researcher in the psych department at Pennsylvania State University. Uh, his frank opinion as an academic responsible for raising the next generation of cognition researchers is that there's no reasoning going on. Then again, it seems like something new that's emerging. I think there was someone at OpenAI now whose responsibility is to actually evolve ChatGPT so that it can perform real reasoning and function in a way that actually can help produce new scientific breakthroughs on its own. When that starts happening, or maybe more to the point, when actual new mathematical proofs are generated through a legitimate reasoning processes by machines, then we can say we actually have real intelligence. That's the impression I'm getting from cognition researchers. Anyway, another thing I wanted to mention that sort of cropped up in my mind as you were talking, you mentioned how real estate purchasing decisions, there's a risk if you're making them by feel, from this point forward. So that reminded me of a term that I've sort of been prodding various GIS companies about on LinkedIn when they're promoting their new products. Moneyball geospatial, because baseball teams used to be selected by feel, but then, there's a movie about money called Moneyball, where they began to use statistics and science to select, baseball teams. So it seems like this concept is now, through geospatial, percolating through the economy.
Yes. So when you come down to it, it's all just math, right? I had the great pleasure of knowing one of the original spatial interaction modelers of our generation, a man by the name of David Huff. And his retail model, often referred to as the Huff model, is well deployed. Some people might call it a gravity model. He often cautioned me never to say it as the gravity model, but many will discuss that. But the point is that it was an arithmetic equation that was used to determine what the probability is of whether this retail establishment had a likelihood of succeeding. So we don't often think of geospatial in terms of mathematical equations, but in many regards it is just that. And I think that we ought to take time to understand that many of the things we do in geospatial are just simply mathematical equations. So that's the one thing. I did want to bring up one other thing because it came to mind in our brief discussion on the AI stuff, because I want to go back to Planet. So during the last quarterly conference call, Will Marshall mentioned the work they're doing with Anthropic. And so if they're ingesting satellite information into Anthropic, I don't know how that gets done. I mean, that's the secret sauce. But that becomes very interesting to me, that maybe they're helping create large geospatial
Yeah.
models. And then you have, what was just introduced about 6 months ago from Niantic Spatial. You know, these are now, companies that have not been in the, discussed enough, perhaps. And of course, Niantic got their money from the original Pokemon Go adventure that they went on. And I think that this is now what we're starting is to percolate these new ideas and new, perhaps, companies that will be the result of leveraging artificial intelligence. And we're going to have to watch them. It's not that the old geo companies are going away. It's just how are they going to evolve and maybe support the growth in using this technology.
Yeah. So you're reminding me of yet another former guest, Mike Spaeth, who was from Earth Daily, but then went across to the US Artificial Intelligence Institute. So when I had him on, he basically said that all of these large language model companies or large geospatial model companies might actually save the Earth observation industry, especially all the SPACs that went public and after COVID. He said that their appetite for data for training purposes might be, something that, means that fewer of them eventually go bankrupt. And you're actually talking about an example there with, did you say Claude or Anthropic and Planet?
Well, Claude is the model, right?
Yeah,
Anthropic is the company.
excuse
Right?
me. Okay. Yeah. All right. So good. We have some dialogue then across the episodes and a confirmation of an idea. Great. So then the last item is education and location intelligence. Few business schools teach the value proposition of location intelligence, and hence few leaders in the C-suite understand how to make money, at least in the context of location intelligence. Could you help us all out here?
Yeah. Yeah, it's before I die, I want to at least go teach a course at a B school, just or even a couple hour seminar just to lay the foundation for students who don't really understand the potential that exists with in using location-based information. So I was one of three people that helped design a course for Penn State University's online campus called Location Intelligence for Business. Oddly enough, it's pretty basic, but it was taught out of the geography department and not in the business school. And so, where it was a relatively popular course and people came away very enthusiastic, it was not exposed to a business student. And so, I would love to have the opportunity, and I've contacted a few schools about this, but I've yet to have anyone take me up on the offer. So if there's anybody listening, I will be happy to come on site, but just to lay the basics of, linking, business with location. And as we discussed, this direct relationship to a value proposition, gross domestic product, how our lives are being radically changed by all of this use of location technology. We just don't know it. We ask where questions every day. We just don't realize we're asking in our normal travel, like, where is the closest, convenience store? Well, I think it's here, but you know what? Over there, they've got really the product I want. So these decisions that we make are all based on proximity and location relationships. And I think at the B schools ought to recognize that you should introduce the technology, introduce the concepts. Again, one reason I wrote the guide to the location intelligence marketplace, that this would be a foundation for them to at least get a basic understanding of what the business of location is all about, who are the companies, and how they might think about, what the prospects are of their own career by at least understanding. And it's kind of like, should I know how to write Python script? Okay, that's a nice tool. Same thing with location technology. It's a tool, right? And so know the basics, apply it to your existing work. And as I often tell students, you don't major in a tool, right? You major in a discipline, right? You major in
Oh,
geography
but
or
that's actually
agriculture
a
or forestry.
problem in the industry. So many of us, in the end, major in a tool, and then our whole careers are the tool of from Esri, and we're all effectively, all, there's a bit of hyperbole there. A significant proportion of us are actually Esri technicians. So, and that's another theme sort of raised by Stephanie May, actually, who used to work at Stamen, who's helped produce the first base map for Facebook. That term first came up actually on the podcast from her. So it's nice that you're also reiterating this idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think that it would help to have, a couple hour seminar to introduce the concepts. It wouldn't, take a lot. I have spoken on college campuses about this. Some friends, invited me once to speak, and I just think it would be an eye-opening experience to hear at least a little bit about the business of location.
It's interesting how Penn State has come up now twice on the podcast, both through Nelson Roquet. Like he's a, as I said, a cognition researcher. But in the conversation I had with him, he sort of has this sort of hobby on the side of using Python for geospatial analysis. And then you've mentioned that you had some sort of relationship with them in terms of some sort of business school type teaching in geospatial. First of all, it sounds like there's another business opportunity in our market for expanding in the education space beyond just the technical. And it reminded me of when I was at the University of Melbourne in the green room, literally this green painted tutorial room, are all us geomatics type people slaved away as part of the overall concrete bunker shaped engineering department. Very far away from Melbourne Business School, which had people just like this, by the way.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's a great point. Something else that I wanted to sort of tag on here was actually related to the previous question or discussion prompt, where you wanted to talk about the companies that are most at risk presently, who don't understand this business shift away from SaaS to AI. Is this a point that could be made if our discipline had the chance to get on the stage, as it were, in business education?
Yeah, so take any SaaS company. It doesn't even have to be in geospatial. And this is not something that was original to me. It was actually made, I believe, by Melius Research, their observation of Salesforce. And they believe that since as a SaaS product, they were at risk of AI, even though they are trying to deploy agents within Salesforce. But the fact that how does the business model evolve if their foundation business in SaaS is now replaced by some of these agents? Do I sell the agents? Do I sell the foundation software? What exactly does that become? And so this is a risk for any of the major geospatial companies that we're talking about. Esri, Precisely, Hexagon, you name them, maybe even to a degree, Autodesk. Where is it that, the business models break down and AI starts to emerge? The thing that I think even the PCs and the VE, the venture capitalists realize is, number one, the AI companies that you hear about, if you listen to any financial news during the day, they are self-funded. They are not going to capital markets. If you look at the cash flow of Oracle, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they are generating a lot of free cash flow that is essentially self-funding their investments in chips and data centers. They're not necessarily going to a JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs to underwrite the acquisition of land or whatever. This is almost a self-funded operation that they're going to, and that's a scary thing when number one, 7 companies are all of a sudden generating all this free cash and are driving the business. So there's almost no guardrails around how much money they're spending, right? And the danger, of course, is one funding another to buy their chips.
I've seen that.
Right,
That's a
right,
sign of a bubble to me.
right. So, here we are today.
We're waiting for the music to stop.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. But if
Uh,
there's no bank underwriting who's willing to pool the money, then any cash that dries up is coming from those, 7 to 10 companies.
Is your point that there's a lack of a source of discipline or external audit on some of these spending patterns?
Well, you listen to the news, and there's these peaks and valleys. Like Microsoft at one point said, "Oh, we're going to pull back our spending on data centers," and then all of a sudden you hear, Satya Nadella said, no, we're good." Like it changes almost month to month as to where their investments are being placed. So it's really hard. And then of course there's Apple, who isn't really being very vocal about what they're doing, and they've got enough cash flow to buy, Perplexity or Anthropic, whoever they're going to, they want to do to upgrade their, their AI capabilities. So, if they can go and spend 30, 40, 50 billion dollars on an acquisition, and that's just like a rounding error in their income. I mean, it's smarter people than me are following what's going on, and maybe smarter people know exactly how much money they need to invest.
Okay, but the theme or the message is clear, that if there is this open warfare with the Magnificent Seven, with around the theme of AI, then surely it wouldn't hurt in whatever business you're running or whatever business an investor is looking at, to consider it from an AI perspective, and whether they can survive if this trend sticks. I also appreciate, it seems like there could be, overall these last two discussion prompts to me are about really a dialogue between engineering schools and business schools. And I really like you making the case that the damage to GDP is strong enough if all geospatial solutions were removed, for this to be of interest to people running a business. Likewise, it sounds like in the dynamics of software businesses, that people in business schools could teach geospatial people about survival as well. Okay, so yeah, I feel like that was a really interesting, engaging survey and endorsement of the depth of knowledge that you've gained over your career of a significantly longer length than mine, Joe. So yeah, such a privilege to have you on. As I understand it, you were involved in Directions Magazine before, On Point with Quorum podcast. Seems like you have quite a decent media footprint.
Yeah, no, I've been happy over my career to be involved in that side of the business. At Directions Magazine, I was editor in chief and vice publisher. And we also started the very first location intelligence conference back in 2004. And those were the heydays of the early days of web-based GIS. And I feel like today there's another opportunity to have a forum for businesses, VCs, PE companies to learn more about that. So I'm happy to make your acquaintance and know that there's somebody out there with a similar desire and interest.
Yeah, I mean, just one more thing that came up earlier on in the discussion, where you talked about the how much trust you should really put in the latest geospatial market intelligence report. And you talked about, you've got 13 segments, right? I think in my segmentation of geospatial public companies, I've got 27 segments, so a bit more resolution there. But nevertheless, there is this segmentation. And a vision I had is that our industry is globally distributed. We have thousands of people in each of these verticals. And if there was enough messaging, signaling coming out of your work, my work, other people who are mouthing off about geospatial regularly, perhaps we could gain the interest of a global network of volunteers within each of these verticals. And they could all, it could just be something you could put on your CV. That's a gain for you. To spend, a week over a year researching your vertical, and then we could all come together and publish, assemble all of these chapters, and it could have the credibility of involving the voices from within these verticals.
That would be interesting. I would like that. I think that there is a need to have that happen. Um, and then I would say that it would be great to have somebody who has financed any of these companies to give us a little perspective and try to encourage us in one way or the other to guide
I
that
love
type
that.
of report.
Because you could have, yes, the internal, the grunt, the person in the
Yeah,
trenches view, yeah, of how often this software fails, really. But
yeah,
then the outsider, the cold hard, someone with the capital, trying not to lose it, trying not to incinerate it, having their view as well. I like the tension between those two poles. So yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, there's our next opportunity, Will.
there we go. Something to collaborate on. Awesome, Joe. Yeah, great first encounter. I hope there will be more.
Yeah, as well. Yeah, thank you very much.